than seems to study under the Sufi masters there, including Junaid and Nuri.
I guess this video is going to be called Reaction to
He studied with Sahl al-Tustari and his group in Basra.
Hallaj,
He was a disciple of the
mystic martyr of Sufism.
But at the same time, he eventually also kind of struck out on his own completely, became very independent of both of these groups. So he sort of straddles different worlds.
Cleaning my room, guys. 420 and Kaka and Cat Kaka go hand in hand in my life. So I'm beginning to see clearly. I'm beginning to see some solutions to my life. First of all, Pussy Paradise has to thrive. Right? We need to go from suffering to buy the next cat food and chicken to top animal shelter in the state of Mexico. An ONG that takes care of all the cats that are stray. We're going to build cat shelters. Perfect little cat shelters. They're going to be like box sized. They're going to have the little blanket. We're going to have the top cat experts working here. Okay? We're going to have totally rebuilt the house. We're going to have a toad aquarium. We're going to have snake aquariums. We're going to have animal protection right here. These predators will erase all life on Earth if we don't do something to make it holistic and real. Sorry, but that's the job. Such lofty realities and experiences, the common people who are not initiated into Sufism will very easily misunderstand what is said and interpret it in heretical and wrong ways. Right? So Sufis were generally very careful about revealing these secrets publicly, whereas Hallaj at this time seems to have completely just walked around preaching publicly to everyone, including about his mystical experiences about union with God. Right? So he became very harshly criticized, even by his own friends and masters, by Ahmed al-Makki, by Junaid, it seems, for breaking this sort of unspoken rule and unspoken rule. Let's do it. Let's do it, man. Him saying something that they saw as wrong, rather about revealing that which was supposed to be kept secret. In this sense, most of the Sufis at that time, including Junaid, represent what is often termed a sober Sufism, whereas Hallaj and an earlier mystic from Iran, Abu Yazid al-Bistami, represents an intoxicated form of Sufism. And these two tendencies have often been in conversation and sometimes maybe in conflict with each other throughout the history of Sufism, although the distinction has, in my opinion, often been a little overemphasized by many scholars. But due to his very daring poems and preaching, Ahmed al-Makki, Junaid, and others directly condemned Hallaj. And he himself seems to have also distanced himself from the Sufis, at some point taking off the woolen garments associated with the movement as a form of asceticism. AI is transforming industries. But how do you take AI from an idea to real impact in your organization? This online course is designed for professionals like you to bridge the gap between AI potential and practical deployment. In this course, you'll learn from 15 MIT professionals about AI models, how to customize it for your needs. We'll talk about how to think how funny it is, human beings teaching human beings about artificial intelligence. How to transform large-scale data sets. If you want to learn about artificial intelligence, we were not expecting generative AI to take off as quickly as it has over the past couple of years.
By bringing insights, by bringing patterns that the human was not able to detect. So working together, there is an enhanced performance.
And the same way with your business data.
I had a delusion, you call it delusion, maybe not entirely so, that I was Jesus Christ or something.
factors through case studies in
ancient Aztec
cybersecurity,
deity or
finance,
something.
logistics,
And
manufacturing,
imagine illusion.
and more. By the end of the class, you'll be able to make informed decisions about AI investments and AI deployments. So join us to become a transformational agent for your organization.
Every human being that saw me face to face or that was shared his face with me was blessed by that. So I had to go to visit and be with as many human beings as possible and have as many as possible. And then eventually it would become like me on a stool surrounded by human faces.
Conectores eléctricos y USB,
Judge or
WC
whatever.
separados, viajar con lujo lo cambia
And
todo.
there it was.
ETN Turista,
That
la
was
vida más cómoda.
So turning off an advertisement was robbing somebody of their blessing of being close to me.
Now, some of his fellow Sufis stuck with him, though, particularly a guy called Ibn Adha and the famous Abu Bakr Ashibli, who remained his friends and supporters all the way up until his death. He had basically struck out on his own, a kind of renegade mystic who was gaining an increasing amount of followers. Indeed, when he went for his second pilgrimage to Mecca in 894, it is said that he was accompanied by 400 disciples. In other words, Hallaj was becoming a very significant religious and mystical figure at that time.
Chemist.
But again, he also had many enemies who consistently tried to defame him and ruin his reputation.
Experiments.
During his pilgrimage,
On
he
a
was
very
accused of being a sorcerer who was working with the jinn, was continuously harassed, including by his old master, Amr al-Makki. But he continued to travel around the Islamic world and even outside it. After his second pilgrimage, he went on a long journey to Central Asia and even all the way to India. He wouldn't return until the year 902, when he once again goes to Mecca, before returning to Baghdad for the last time. Once back in Baghdad, he started acting strange. More strange than usual. He could be found in the mosques and marketplaces, saying
so what is the
pure
goal?
things,
What is the goal?
exclaiming his
the goal
mystical experiences and ideas. And even it seems, in some cases, he seems to kind of express a wish for people to have him killed. He seems to say in many of his poems and in many stories that he wants to die. Many of the stories in the so-called Akhbar al-Hallaj, the news of Hallaj, tell of these kinds of explanations and sayings.
If you look
It
at
can
it
be
from
hard to know when he's talking about a spiritual death. Again, this was common in Sufism to talk about being annihilated in God and using death as a kind of metaphor in that sense. It's hard to know if he means this kind of death, metaphorically, spiritually, or if he's in some profound way kind of predicting his own untimely ends. In one famous poem, he says, "Kill me, friends. Killing is my life.
Kind of absurd, isn't it?
My death is in my life. My life is in my
a
death.
signed document.
Annihilation of my essence is the noblest of my glories,
Not
and my
just
attributes remaining is the
pixels.
finest of my crimes. My spirit fires of my life amid its
An
lingering
old
traces.
piece of
So
paper,
kill me, burn
with
me
old
in
types
these
of
fading
scribblings can
bones,
be more,
and
far
lay
more
past my
valuable
dust in ruined tombs.
than.
You will find my lover's secrets folded into my remains."
Thank you.
It is said that Hallaj built a kind of makeshift version of the Kaaba in his backyard and circumambulated it instead of going to Mecca for the Hajj. In fact, it was this that was to perhaps prove the most controversial of all,
Like in
and a key
Medina.
justification for his later execution. But we'll get there in time. Hallaj remained very popular as a preacher and spiritual master among the general population, having many followers and admirers, which would later come to be referred to as the Hallajiyya. There were even significant people in the aristocracy that became his supporters, including two Abbasid viziers, Ibn Hamdan and Ibn Isa. Hallaj's constant preaching and condemnation of the immoral state and inequity in society had a very powerful effect. He said, "How long do you confess the one who sees you in a sea of errors though you don't see him? Your way should be piety and religion, but your deed is the deed of the voluptuous. You think that you are free from any sin, but God's eye is the witness that observes you. Do you desire forgiveness for your sins, but you don't even seek his satisfaction? Can you be happy with your sins and errors, forgetting him when there is no other? Your repent before you die, before the day when slaves encounter what their hands have done. These kinds of sermons and teachings that he would give in Baghdad
One thing,
were so
Pussy
powerful
Paradise is always going to be.
that they seem to have kind of started a movement in the city that sought a kind of moral reform of society. And it seems that in some ways Hallaj may have been seen as a kind
Pussy
of
Paradise is
for this
not run
movement,
by
a
humans.
movement that definitely in some
It's run
ways
by plants
threatened
and
the
animals.
power of the Abbasic regime. This, I think, is
You
very
know?
important
If you know, you
for what
know.
happens at the end of this story.
You don't know.
These poems and sermons also clearly point to an important fact, that Hallaj was undoubtedly a Muslim.
Should know.
Just like with many other Sufis in history, including perhaps most famously Rumi, they sometimes claim that Hallaj somehow stands outside of Islam, or that he was only Muslim in name while holding some other actual affiliation or philosophy.
I don't have much against commercials. Hotels. Yeah, I got to go to the US, guys. And I'm thinking November, December is when. And here's what needs to happen before I get to the US. I need to get 2,000 pesos. I need to fix my eyes again. So I need to go to Oregon and see my Oregon caretaker.
Es útil para algunas personas, pero la verdadera ley de la atracción en realidad tiene que ver con la resonancia. Tú evolucionas, y a medida que evolucionas, todo lo que resuena con ese nuevo tú llega a ti. Pero en última instancia, no se trata de adquirir cosas, se trata de convertirte en la mejor, más grandiosa y más increíble versión de ti mismo. Pase de hacer a ser. Y ser lo mismo significaba que todo lo demás en mi vida tenía que volverse secundario frente a estos valores. Cuando empecé a vivir los mismos cuatro valores y los convertí en el
Look at those good things,
casi
man.
parecía como si la vida se volviera
Oh,
mágica.
yes, good
Había
things.
momentos mágicos, coincidencias y sincronías. En resumen, estaba en estado de flujo. Ahora, esto es lo que sucedió cuando hice ese cambio.
I'm
Lo
looking
primero que
for a
pasó
very
fue
specific
que la
book that I
empresa, que
wrote.
estaba estancada, de repente empezó a explotar, creciendo un 50% año tras año. Ni siquiera podía explicarlo. Simplemente parecía que estábamos bendecidos. Llegaban las personas correctas y las oportunidades adecuadas. Pero una de las cosas más curiosas fue que mi cuerpo físico cambió. La primera foto, en realidad, soy yo. En la segunda foto, mi cuerpo había cambiado por completo. Había pasado de tener quizá un 22% de grasa corporal a un 14%. Tenía astigmatismo en mi ojo izquierdo. Mi astigmatismo desapareció. No podía entender que mi salud realmente estaba cambiando. Ahora sé por qué sucedía y te lo voy a mostrar. Pero cuando practiques estas ideas, tu apariencia física cambiará. Tu cuerpo físico cambiará. No solo cambió el mundo exterior, sino también el mundo interior. Entonces, ¿cómo llegas ahí? Bueno, profundizas en la identificación de tus valores. Te voy a enseñar cómo hacerlo en un momento. Lo que estás a punto de escuchar no es solo otra lección de crecimiento personal. Esto es una lección a un nivel fundamental.
Ephesians is Paul, obviously. Yeah, had to be, of course. But I don't remember which one it is. But you guys know which one it is because I've said it many times. Let's study a little Islam, shall we?
And just like with Rumi, the kind of position can only be upheld if one hasn't revealed or engaged with his actual works to any significant depth. Regardless of any normative statements about heresy or what any sort of true Islam is supposed to be, there is no doubt that Hallaj saw himself as a Muslim and that his works are deeply dependent on the Islamic framework. The foremost European scholar of Hallaj in modern times is without doubt Louis Massignon. His life work was basically dedicated to Hallaj, and his massive full-volume study called The Passion of Hallaj a key source for anyone getting into the topic. Massignon is basically responsible for Hallaj being as famous as he is today. And for sure, he was a known name in Sufi circles of history, but nowhere near as central of a symbol and figure as he has become today. was owed to the work of Louis Masson. Being a Catholic himself, he still saw in Hallaj a great inspiration, kind of comfort, a spiritual master who in more ways than one reminds us of Jesus in his life. But with that said, even he wouldn't go as far as denying the Muslim character of Hallaj. He says, the question of how far this spiritual position is accepted in Islam can be debated. What matters to us from the very outset is the fact that Hallaj was specifically a Muslim. Not just the original terms of his lexicon and the framework of his system, but the whole thrust of his thought derives from a solitary, exclusive, slow, profound, fervent, and practical meditation. Now, of course, he was criticized by many contemporary
Deutsches
Muslims,
Schriftsteller
including his fellow
Lexikon.
Sufis, as we saw, as well as, for example, the founder of the
Schönheim,
Wahhabism.
Neustadt.
But many others, some from
Wiesbaden,
different schools,
demokratisch
also
radikale. Glücklich ist auf Jahren der Treffer der pädagogischen Literatur.
He actually organized a kind of demonstration around
Aber nein, das ist nicht, was ich suche. Ich suche etwas anderes.
And it is
Das
interesting to consider
suche ich.
where Hallaj himself lay on the
Sehr gut, sehr gut.
school
Oh
spectrum.
mein Gott, was ist denn los?
As we mentioned, he grew up and studied primarily in Rasit, which at this time was a center for
Jetzt.
And Massignon points out that there are references in his works to characteristically Hanbali teachings and Quranic interpretations. This suggests that Hallaj, if he attended a specific school at all, might himself have been a Hanbali.
Icicle is the light skin. This is Icicle. Can't see what I was doing. What? Licked cat. If you haven't licked a cat today, bad on you. So, okay. Die da suche ich.
This is the school of law that was founded by Ahmad
Wunderschön.
Hanbal and is often seen as the most
Das werden wir noch lesen.
puritanical of the four major
Ganz
schools of
notwendig.
Islamic law.
Wichtig.
This might come off as
Und die da
surprising to
suche
many
ich
who
auch.
associate Sufis and
Weil
especially
es gibt
mystics like
interessante
Hallaj
Ideen
with a kind of
zum
liberal attitude.
heißt, naja,
We should remember, though, that at this time, the schools were in their infancy and weren't fully formed in the way that we would recognize them today. But I think this is important to show that often the ways that we like to categorize these kinds of figures
Musik, sehr
don't
wichtig.
really sync up with actual history. Many of the mystics, and people today think mystics are these antinomian sort of free
Was wünscht er?
liberal thinkers. Often the mystics are the people that are most strictly adherent to this sort of religious law, whether it be Christian or Islamic or whatever. And Hallaj, in some sense, might be one such example. He might have been a Hanbali, which is obviously the most strict, most conservative of the law schools in Islam. Even though, again, this is early on, the schools aren't fully formed, they haven't taken on many of their characteristics yet. And certainly Hallaj is very unique, and he certainly goes against a lot of what we associate with a more non-Sufi sort of orthodox Islam. We should also be careful to group things like that because the Sufis were the orthodox Muslims for most of history, right? So it's a lot more complicated than we often like to believe. And Hallaj is a good sort of jumping off point to getting into some of those discussions and realizing that history is complicated. But regardless of his affiliations in fiqh or law, his self-understanding as a Muslim is without question, which becomes very clear when we read his actual writings. Hallaj was, maybe surprisingly, a pretty prolific writer. He wasn't just some strange guy who walked around being provocative, but composed many different works, both poetry and prose. In Ibn al-Adim's Fihrist, or Catalog of Literature, He lists 46 books by Hallaj,
See that?
and they vary greatly in topic, from commentaries on the
information.
Quran, strange mystical texts, and even treatises on politics.
Numbers.
The problem with this is
Something
that almost
important.
none of this output survives
Something
today.
worthwhile.
There's very little by
Something
Hallaj
that
to
needs to
actually
get
study.
done.
He remained a controversial figure after his death, which might have contributed to why most of his books sort of disappeared.
If you haven't bought El cómic pirata de los Sims
Which was
3,
collected into a
you're a
divan
fool.
by Massignon in the 20th century. Many of these poems are uncertain in their
Daniel,
legitimacy,
despierta.
and some probably
Me llamaba un cierto
apocryphal
varón
by
Alexander
other
von
mystics.
Stratt, ofreciendo vida
But
eterna.
still, this is a
También,
significant collection.
arriba, despiértate.
Another
Ven a
surviving
vernos,
work,
es un
and
vampiro.
perhaps his most famous,
Podemos
is a book
vivir
called
para
the
siempre.
Kitab at-Tawasi.
Damián,
This is an incredibly difficult and dense mystical treatise divided into 11 short chapters, or individual treatises perhaps, dealing with epistemology, the character and ascension of the Prophet Muhammad, and even the status of Satan, accompanied by diagrams and symbols that aim to portray some of the lofty mystical teachings. There's also a work called Akhbar al-Hallaj, or News of Hallaj. This isn't a work by the man himself, but a collection of stories, sayings, and poems from Hallaj compiled by his students, and serves as an important source not only for these direct quotations, but also for some details on his life.
J'aimerais que plus de femmes âgées sachent que le yoga sur chaise imprimable aide à perdre le ventre causé par le cortisol. Le lundi 15 septembre. Dès demain, on lance le yoga sur chaise imprimable, idéal pour les articulations raides, les matins difficiles et les ventres gonflés. Conçu pour les femmes, par une femme. Ressentez-le en 7 jours. Voyez-le en 2 semaines. Étonnez-vous en 30. Imprimez votre guide.
tenemos por supuesto a Ántaro, que va a ser adoptado. Este gato necesita un hogar nuevo. Este gato necesita un nuevo hogar. Mírenlo, está siendo torturado aquí por mí. Yo estoy torturando a este gato. Estoy torturando al gato. Necesita un hogar. ¿Verdad? Y esta cosa terrible que se esconde de mí todo el tiempo es salvaje. Se cree gato salvaje. De Ramira. Original. Ese güey es familia real.
So what was it that
Es un
Hallaj
Ramiro.
taught? What was his Sufism, so to say? What were those ideas that made him so controversial, but also that helped him survive for millennia up until today? While his status as a Sufi can be contested, there is no doubt that he studied under some of the major Sufi personalities and mystics of that time, including, as we saw, Sahl al-Tustari, Junaid, and Ahmed al-Makki. And a lot of his ideas and emphases thus fit rather well into a Sufi framework. In particular, Hallaj was very focused on the idea and experience of union with God. Through ascetic and spiritual practices, which the Sufis taught, on top of the prescribed prayers and rituals of the Islamic religion, the worshipper can strip himself of all worldly aspects, all personal traits and identifications, and ultimately to become annihilated. This state of annihilation is central to Sufism and is referred to as fana. And Hallaj expresses this union in many of his poems and writings. In one of his most famous and striking poems, he expresses these precise ideas about annihilation, union, and the collapsing of distinction between the knower and the known. رأيت ربي بعين قلبي فقلت من أنت قال أنت فليس للعين منك عين وليس عين بحيث أنت وليس للوحم منك وحم فيعلم الوحم أين أنت أنت على حست كل عين بنحوي لا عين فأين أنت وفي فنائي فنائي وفي فنائي وجدت أنت. I saw my Lord with the eye of my heart. I said, who are you? he said, you. But for you, where cannot have a place, and there is no where when it concerns you. The mind has no image of your existence in time, which would permit the mind to know where you are.
Meow.
You are the one who encompasses everywhere,
Meow.
up to the point of
Meow.
nowhere. So where are you? And in my annihilation was annihilated, and in my annihilation I found you. And this is also related to what is probably the most famous saying in the story about Hallaj's life, when he, in a bout of ecstatic trance, exclaimed, Ana al-Haq, meaning, I am the truth, or I am the real. There are many different versions of when or how he is supposed to have exclaimed this, many claiming that it was after an intense session of Sufi dhikr meditation practice. But regardless, it did become something strongly associated with Hallaj. Now, al-Haq is one of the names of God in the Quran, which, as we said, can mean things like the truth or the real, sometimes even the right. What's important is that by saying al-Haq, I am al-Haq, Hallaj was seemingly identifying himself with God. This is an example of what is known as an ecstatic utterance that was common among certain Sufis and mystics. Another famous example of this is Hallaj's near contemporary, Abu Yazid al-Bistami, who is thought to have exclaimed, Subhani, which means glory be to me. This has a similarly shocking implication, being a play on the common Muslim saying, Subhanallah, glory be to God. That Hallaj said al-Haq seems relatively certain, given that he became so strongly associated with the exclamation and also so early in history. But it's often mistakenly believed that this was the reason for his execution. In fact, this seems to have played no part in it at all. For sure, some people were shocked over a statement like that, but the general opinion has been that exclamations made during spiritual rapture are not liable to punishment.
If you don't have another cat,
They are said while in
something
a
wrong with
moment
you.
of ecstatic, mystical experience,
Every family
so one is not
knows
liable
how
to be
these
punished in the same way as someone
one
who
toad
is sober, so to say. But we do get actual poems and quotes where he says Anal-Haq, but in other contexts. For example, there's a reference of this very phrase in one of his poems, which goes, My unique one chose me for a unique truth, one to which no path leads. For I am the truth, a truth that truth deserved. Clothing its with no more separation. Rising suns have manifested shining, glittering, and the rising suns are lightning. But what does this actually mean? Was Hallaj saying that he was God? That God was incarnated in him in some way? In short, no, he isn't saying this at all. As we've explored, this seems to be a direct reference to the common idea and experience in Sufism of fana, or annihilation.
Eine professionelle Website ist heute der Schlüssel zum Erfolg im Internet. Wenn es das Hosting deiner Website geht, vertraue auf GoDaddy, den Weltmarktführer im Webhosting. Mit sicherem Hosting kannst du gewährleisten, dass deine Website zuverlässig funktioniert. Jetzt mit kostenloser Domain und SSL-Zertifikat bei jährlicher Laufzeit. Mehr dazu gibt's bei GoDaddy.
When the mystic manages to reach a state where he no longer experiences himself or any individuality, all his attributes fall away. He becomes extinguished like the moth who flies into the flame. And now, nothing is experienced but the reality of God. No individuality remains, only the divine. So Hallaj isn't propping himself up to be divine. On the contrary, actually, this experience of union and the expression of I am the truth is the ultimate self-negation. There is no Hallaj left, only God. Sufis Sufis across history have always been very careful when expressing these ideas to avoid anything that might be understood as what is known in Arabic as hulul, which means incarnation, a doctrine associated primarily with Christians and perhaps Hindus to some degree. But this is not what Hallaj is expressing. And this becomes very clear from one of his poems. The Akhbar al-Hallaj says that one day Hallaj was in a mosque in Baghdad begging the people to have him killed. After which he says, "Is it you or I? That will be two gods in me. Far, far be it from you to assert duality. The he-ness that is yours is in my nothingness forever. My all added to your all will be a double disguise. But where is your essence from my vantage point when I see you, since my essence has become plain in the place where I am not? And where is your face? It is the object of my gaze, whether in my inmost heart or in the glance of my eye. Between you and me, there is an I am that battles me. So take away by your grace this I am from in between." In reality, there are never two things that become united. There can only be one reality that is experienced once the ego or the nafs, the self, has become annihilated. In the same story, Hallaj summarizes this nicely when he says that the path is between two, but there is no other with God. In his prose work, the Tawasim, he also talks about this union by employing the image of the moth and the flame. Quote, "The glimmer from the candle is the knowledge of reality. The heat from the candle is the reality of reality. Rejoining the burning candle is the real of reality. The moth can only reach his desires and true knowledge by rejoining the candle, by burning himself up in it." This is a theme that will be picked up and used by famous later Sufi poets like Rumi and Martyr. And later on in the same text, he also profoundly proclaims, "Now reality is reality, and nature is created. Hence, cast created nature far from yourself, so that you may become him, and he you in reality." Here, in a very short sentence, he nicely summarizes the idea of union and annihilation. But at the same time, while he seems to be talking about the same kind of experiences and ideas that many other Sufis do, Hallaj is quite unique, sometimes at least, in the way that he expresses it, in the very shocking and provocative language that he uses. I'm sure if you have watched this channel for a while, many of these themes and poems will be quite familiar to you, right? If you've read Sufi poetry, this is kind of what that is, right? They talk about union and becoming annihilated and all the time, right? So this might seem like treading familiar water. We've heard this all before. This is actually not always the case with Hallaj. On the one hand, we have to remember that Hallaj is quite early. Again, he's one of the earliest famous Islamic mystics and Sufis. He lives in the 9th and early 10th century. So, in that sense, he's significant for this reason, because he is one of the pioneers of this kind of Sufi poetry, this kind of language, which makes it interesting to study and consider. On the other hand, some of the poems of Hallaj, even keeping in mind all these things we know about how Sufis express themselves, even then, he comes off as very shocking sometimes. And I think this is for the same reason. When we read later Sufi writers, Rumi, Attar, Ibn Arabi, Ibn Farid, at that point in the Middle Ages, a kind of rule system and language has been established, right? Centuries have gone by, the Sufis have agreed on how we are supposed to talk about these ineffable experiences, how we express union without falling into something that sounds too much like hulul, like incarnation, for example. And even though they can be shocking, especially someone like Ibn Arabi or Shushtari, for example, they're always a bit careful, right? They're always a bit careful not to go too far. And even when they do go very far, sometimes they're mad. It will be like, I become united to God, but this is not hulul. It's very common for them to actually add that afterwards. This is very important. For Hallaj, some of these poems, even for someone who's used to Sufi poetry, they come off as really shocking. Take, for example, what is maybe his most famous poem. أنا من أحوى ومن أحوى أنا. نحن روحاني حلنا بدنا فإذا أبصرتني أبصرته وإذا أبصرته أبصرتنا.
I am one. I have a cat, an unhealthy coffee addiction, and I can speak French. Before every French lesson, I make myself a coffee. Side note, I'm also a coffee addict. I organize myself and set up my laptop. I then look back at my previous lesson to review my notes. Oops, and quickly finish my homework. Then I enter to the online classroom. I have a few minutes to review objectives and cover mistakes while I wait for the lesson to start. Oh, here's my tutor. He's French speaking. I never thought I could speak with learning new language. Prepping makes it fun and something I actually look forward to. Start speaking with confidence. Try prepping, please.
Now on Artlist, your VO3 credits are worth more, so you can generate way more.
So I'm out here sweating, and it costs less?
I'm doing all this heavy lifting for less credits?
Are you kidding me? So more videos mean more takes?
That's right.
I'm not eating this again.
Go to Artlist and generate more.
I told
I am the one I desire. The one I desire is I.
Mauricio.
We are two spirits dwelling in
I told Mauricio today that we talk about how we're going to die, obviously, which is a very common topic conversation here in this house. And I said to him that one of my perfect deaths would be right underneath that tree, the tree that fell in the house, which I've already built into a carajo. The cabin in front is no longer there. There's this magic circle is back. And it's all forest, all the way down there, and it's snowing. And my death begins on the big toe, on my big toe. I feel the death arriving first on my big toe. And that's the perfect death. That's the perfect way to die. Then we talked about some other ways we can die. I told him where I could kill him. He told me where he could kill me. All those basic tropes of necromancers and bards talking in the tavern about shit. And yeah, there's a lot of different places where I die in this house, but I see myself dying in this house. The garden, the front porch, which is the perfect one. The kitchen. ¿Qué haces con esos gatos? Ven y saluda al público amado, güey.
Por aquí ando.
Ven a saludar al público amado, cabrón. No eres invisible.
Aquí ando. No, estoy caliente.
Ya, calienta algo, comerte, muero de hambre. Anyways, where was I? Yeah, we were talking about places to die. So there's a place where he dies, a place where I die. There's helicopters when he dies, by the way. And it's all good. It's all good. I've seen the zombie apocalypse happen 10,000 different ways in this house, in my dreams. I now recognize that. I've seen all those different scenarios happen over and over. The red building that was built over here, I saw a lot of different scenarios on that building too. Particularly fights to the death and shit like that, which I don't know where it came from, but it came. And yeah, we're working on dying the right way, So that tree over there, me with my feet up, relaxed, wearing a coat full of cats. Which is the weird part. But it's what it is, And I could see where, using the skin of a dead cat to make a coat would not be too bad. Yakuza do it. So the Yakuza do it, it's probably legit. Martyr is looking at me saying that. What the f are you talking about, man? What's wrong with you? Just looking at me like, shut the fuck up. So I will.
A single body.
So
When you've
that's
seen me, you've seen him.
I'm keeping 13, by the way.
And when you've seen him,
Martyr is much too much of a magic
two
cat
spirits dwelling in a single body.
not to
This
be
is very
held
unusual language.
in my
and certainly
hands.
runs the risk of being interpreted as something closer to
And this guy,
than the classic Sufi metaphysics that we have described.
Urukai, is very
In other
disappointed.
points, he talks about it as
Wants to
two
stay.
spirits mixing. Quote,
I just
your spirit
think
has
we need to
mixed
find
with
him a
my
good home.
spirit,
Him
as
and
ambergris is mixed with aromatic musk.
her and his
If
Urukai's
anything
a girl.
touches you, it
Yeah.
touches me.
Very
And since you
magical.
are me,
Her
we cannot
and
differ.
need to find a place to live.
Your spirit was mixed with my spirit, just like wine and clear water. If something touches
It
you,
is what it
it
is.
touches me.
Can you keep
For
all
you
of
or
things?
I in every state. Quite a strong statement, right? Even for a Sufi poet. So you can see why he is so famous and controversial, not only for his behavior, as we saw, which was quite unusual, but also for the very profound ways that he expressed himself, shocking ways sometimes that he expressed himself in his actual poetry. So the union is at the center of a lot of his poetry. And some even seem to detect a kind of monistic metaphysics hiding behind the words too. In some ways, this is the natural extension of the idea that once we annihilate our ego, we experience God as the only reality. But at the same time, this is long before figures like Ibn Arabi would properly develop a system for that kind of philosophy. It's uncertain where Hallaj stands in terms of
I'm
such
gonna move
ideas, but his poetry and writings might have served as an important
up there,
background
and I'm gonna
for
put
how
it
those later
behind
doctrines were formulated.
behind bricks
Just listen to this
so
part, for
that the
example.
cats don't
His existence is through me,
profanate it
and my
too much.
existence is through him.
Because down there on the
As for his
bottom
description,
floor, it
he
just
is the one who tells it.
it's not working.
If not for him,
But
I
that's
have no
a
guidance.
longer
If not
project. It's
for
a
me,
more
he
difficult
had no
project
knowledge.
that requires
In
more
every meaning, there is something that means him. Tell those who contradict
sacrifice.
me, you are wrong. There is nothing but the merciful, my friends, with which our spirit can be intimate. One indication of a broader metaphysical or theological picture becomes clear through Hallaj's focus on the theme of love. Now again, if you've watched this channel for a while, you'll know that what we're discussing here sounds annoyingly familiar. Themes of love and union are some of the most recurring themes in Sufism, and we've explored them numerous times before. But again, remember how early this is. Hallaj very much sets the...
So you want to play guitar, but you think to yourself, I could never do that. And you think learning is boring and dry. Here's the deal, it doesn't have to be. I'm Anders Mortensen, and I absolutely love playing guitar. And I've been doing it since I was a little kid in Denmark. For over 15 years, I've performed and recorded with a bunch of amazing artists like Can, Pink, John Fogerty, Taylor Swift, and many others. I've toured the world, played in arenas, TV shows, recorded in major studios, and in Nashville. And let's also say that as I'm playing guitar, I know what's important and what's not. And now you can learn those things from me with my new Guitar Fundamentals course on guitartricks.com. Guitar is the coolest instrument, and it always will be. You don't need to know a lot to get really far. Whether this is the first time you've picked up a guitar or you've played before, you're going to have a ton of fun in this course. With guitar, the sky's the limit. You can play so many styles of music: country, rock, blues, hip-hop, funk, classical, jazz. You can make guitar sound like anything with pedals and amps. I'm sure you've seen that other courses emphasize a lot of discipline, technique, music theory, and you're left wondering when you actually get to the fun stuff. Guitar is an instrument for everyone, and you can play real music almost right away. You don't need to be a professional or a born artist. You don't need to study for years in order to experience this joy. Instead of the traditional conservatory methods, I've come up with a that's built around being fun and motivating. Rather than drilling one exercise after another, we're going to do exactly what your favorite artists and songwriters throughout history have done: make music. So check it out. I'll teach you the basics: tuning, fretting notes, strumming, chords, melodies, but we're going to do it like super easy songs.
foundation, in many ways, for Sufi expression through poetry.
the central axis of her mystical relationship with God. Hallaj seems to take this even further by placing it at the core of his metaphysics. All of existence is built on love. Love is its very foundation and reality. In what is perhaps one of his most beautiful poems, he says, "Love is a primordial eternity eternal. In him, by him, from him. It begins in him. Love is not temporal, since it was an attribute of the one whose martyrs are alive. His attributes are from him, in him, but not temporal, for temporality is what begins in things. When the beginning began, his love began as an attribute in that which began, and in him gleamed the shining. For the man was affectionate to the inclined Aleph, and both were one, which means in the beginning. But in separation they are two, when they are together separately, one's the devotee, and one's the Lord. These are the realities, the fire of longing, burning for reality, whether they stay or go. They're humble, worthless.
By the way, Maui 11
The mighty become
needs a home.
humbled in the longing.
Maui 11 needs a home. Maui 11 needs a home. A good person to take care, love, and cherish. Maui 11.
This comes out
Maui
perhaps
11
most clearly
needs a
in the
home.
aforementioned Kitab and Tawasin. The Tawasin is a truly baffling mystical work. It is, as mentioned earlier, divided into 11 different chapters or short treatises dealing with different topics. The first chapter is basically dedicated to praising the Prophet Muhammad. Chapters 2 and 3 explore themes of union and mystical imagination. 4 and 5 are dedicated to the ascension of the Prophet Muhammad, the so-called Mi'raj. It is chapter 6 that is perhaps the most interesting and shocking, because here Hallaj introduces the idea that Satan, known as Iblis in Islam, is actually the true monotheist and worshipper of God. You see, in the Quran, it is told that when God created Adam, the first human being, he asked all the angels to prostrate themselves before the snake, showing that the human being, at least in potential, is higher than the angels themselves.
¿Has oído hablar de este producto nuevo que limpia inodoros al instante sin necesidad de fregar? Tome cualquier inodoro sucio, vierta una pequeña cantidad de espuma y observe cómo la espuma se expande para cubrir todo el tazón. Déjelo reposar durante unos 20 minutos, luego tire de la cadena y disfrute de un inodoro que parece recién limpiado. Con su tecnología de nanored patentada, descompone los depósitos difíciles debajo de la línea de agua con un mínimo de fregado, manteniendo su inodoro limpio por más tiempo, sin complicaciones. Esto hace que su inodoro luzca impecable y huela fresco, todo sin el esfuerzo de fregar o usar limpiadores tóxicos. El doctor Akira Yamada, un químico respetado con años de experiencia trabajando en laboratorios líderes de productos de limpieza, estaba harto de fregar inodoros. Vivimos en un mundo de innovaciones, sin embargo, todavía estamos fregando inodoros de la manera difícil. Sabía exactamente que era hora de un cambio, así que el doctor Yamada aplicó su experiencia en química e inventó un método de limpieza revolucionario. El doctor Yamada lo llamó espuma de limpieza para inodoros. La fórmula
Iblis, or Satan, refused, however. He didn't want to bow down before Adam, and so was debased. And Hallaj has a very interesting take on the story, however. Rather than the usual interpretation of seeing Satan as rejecting God's command due to his own arrogance, here he says that portrayed as the ultimate monotheist, refusing to prostrate before Adam because he would never prostrate before anyone but God, God's self. Quote, God had said to him, bow down before Adam, not before another than you, even if my curse falls upon you, and it would not hurt me. Satan said, I reject your command in order to affirm you wholly. My mind is going mad because of you. What is Adam? Nothing but for you. Who am I then? I, Satan, to distinguish him from you. I don't think I need to tell you that this is a very radical interpretation. But it's one that kind of makes sense from our point of view. Satan becomes almost like a tragic hero in a certain sense. He's entirely devoted to God to the very end, with a strength that simultaneously becomes his very weakness. Quote, there had been no monotheist Barahit comparable to Satan among the inhabitants of heaven. The essence appeared to him in all its purity. He forbade himself out of shyness even to wink at it, and began to venerate the beloved in ascetic solitude. This strong devotion to God is also what leads to his downfall, because it does, even in this version of events, lead to a kind of arrogance. Satan sees himself as better than Adam because he is so devoted to God. Quote, he fell into the ocean of majesty, he lost his sight in it, and said then, I who want no other way to you than passing through you, am I to be a second level? You became proud. Had there been only a glance between us, it would have been fitting for me already
Maui
to
12.
but I am he who has
Needs a
known
home.
you from pre-eternity.
Maui 12 needs a home. Somebody that won't sacrifice him to dogs because there's the
For I
Maui
have
thing.
served you for the longest time. No one of the two kinds of creatures knows you better than I. My intention touches you, your intention touches me. Both existed before Adam. Whether I bow down before another than you, or bow down at all,
Teenagers are building businesses with AI, while the only AI you know is ChatGPT. Let's be real. Most people over 40 use ChatGPT.
I must return to my origin. Now you created me of fire, and fire returns to fire, according to a balance and a choice that is your own. So clearly, Hallaj isn't actually arguing for the goodness of Satan. He isn't saying that Satan is a good character. He isn't like turning the story upside down completely. He still has an arrogance, and he's punished for his arrogance and for not obeying God's command. But he adds this really interesting flavor to the story, this really interesting perspective where Satan's arrogance comes from him being completely devoted to God. Right? His devotion to God is what leads to his arrogance in some way. It leads him to actually disobey God's command because he doesn't want to prostrate before anyone but God. And he knows that this will also lead to his punishment, to his being debased. But he still does it. He's that devoted to God. So it's a really sort of tragic character, and it's really, really fascinating. Hallaj says, the most eloquent of mystics kept silent about Satan, and the sages lack the strength to utter what they have learned about him. Satan is more informed than they about worship. He is closer than they to the being. He has devoted himself more zealously to serve him. He has kept more to his vow than they. He has drawn nearer than they to the beloved. The other angels bowed down before Adam because they were no longer standing, and Satan refused to bow down because he had been in contemplation a long time. And yet, alas, he was muddled. He ceased to trust in God. He said, I am worth more than he. He remained on this side of the veil. He wallowed in mud and embraced damnation for the post-eternity of post-eternities. Shocking as this idea may appear, it would be picked up by later Sufis as well. Perhaps most famously in the writings of Ayman Qadhat, who interestingly, together with Hallaj and Sufi'anadi, remained three main schools of mysticism, because they were all in general pretty unusual in the circumstances. In any case, these were the kinds of
Maravilloso, güey.
¡Te odio! ¡Te odio! Yo te dije, lo chingué, me falta. Algo me falta.
Ah, los gatos.
Ya, se me perdieron. Y es que me voy a salir a hacer fuego. ¿Para comer?
had aroused the attention of the authorities, both those who sympathetic to his teachings, but also those who saw in him a great danger. And he has
shit. Okay, well, do it, man.
reform in society. He was a
Do it,
powerful
do it.
man in some sense, and could potentially become
Quest for fire, motherfucker.
if things were allowed to continue.
It's the quest for fire.
This is at least one of the main reasons why things turned out the way they did.
That's what they
He
say.
associated with certain parts of the aristocracy, and when there was a failed coup in 908, things changed not like Hallaj at all. In fact, Hallaj at this point basically became connected with the losing side of this palace intrigue. Wisely, as a result, he fled to Sus, but was eventually apprehended and was brought back to Baghdad, where he would be imprisoned and remain imprisoned for the rest of his life. But what was the charge exactly? Well, as we can clearly see, the political reasons behind it are pretty clear. On paper, he was accused of hulul, or incarnationism, the very doctrine that we saw rejected in an earlier video. Actually, other charges were brought against him that he was a Shi'i sympathizer. If you remember, he had earlier had some very loose connections to the Zenj rebellion through his brother-in-law. And throughout his last years, he was also repeatedly accused of being an agent or sympathizer for the Karmatians, an Ismaili Shi'i group at the time that was a thorn in the Abbasid side, and among other things, would actually later go on to sack Mecca and remove the black stone from the Kaaba. There's no indication or evidence that Hallaj had anything to do with the Karmatis. As we saw, he seemed to have pretty strongly aligned with what would later become known as Sunni Islam. But nonetheless, these accusations were made, and he was even at one point exposed on a podium in Baghdad with a town crier saying, "Behold the missionary of the Karmatis."
Él dice que mucha gente interpreta esta concepto como la ley de la atracción. Piensa que se trata de, ya sabes, pensar en lo que deseas, el amor, el auto, el dinero, y atraer eso hacia ti. Él dice, ese es un nivel de entendimiento de jardín de niños. Es útil para algunas personas, pero la verdadera ley de la atracción en realidad tiene que ver con la resonancia. Tú evolucionas, y a medida que evolucionas, todo lo que resuena con ese nuevo tú llega a ti. Pero en última instancia, no se trata de adquirir cosas, se trata de convertirte en la mujer más grandiosa y más increíble versión de ti mismo. Pasé de hacer, y ser yo mismo significaba que todo lo demás en mi vida tenía que volverse secundario frente a estos valores. Cuando empecé a vivir desde estos 4 valores y los convertí en el núcleo de quién era, casi parecía como si la vida se volviera mágica. Había momentos mágicos, coincidencias y sincronías. En resumen, estaba en estado de flujo. Ahora, esto es lo que sucedió cuando hice ese cambio. Lo primero que pasó fue que la empresa, que estaba estancada, de repente empezó a explotar, creciendo un 50% año tras año. Ni siquiera podía explicarlo. Simplemente parecía que estábamos bendecidos. Llegaban las personas correctas y las oportunidades adecuadas. Pero una de las cosas más curiosas fue que mi cuerpo físico cambió. La primera foto, en realidad, soy yo. En la segunda foto, mi cuerpo había cambiado por completo. Había pasado de tener quizá un 22% de grasa corporal a un 14%. Tenía astigmatismo en mi ojo izquierdo. Mi astigmatismo desapareció. No podía entender que realmente estaba cambiando. Ahora sé por qué sucedía y te lo voy a mostrar. Pero cuando practiques estas ideas, tu apariencia física cambiará. Tu cuerpo físico cambiará. No solo cambió el mundo exterior, sino también el mundo interior. Entonces, ¿cómo llegas ahí? Bueno, profundizas en la identificación de tus valores. Te voy a enseñar cómo hacerlo en un momento. Lo que estás a punto de escuchar no es solo un examen personal, esto es una disrupción a un nivel fundamental. En los próximos minutos puede que te encuentres cuestionando todo, tu carrera, tus relaciones, tus metas, incluso tus creencias más profundas. ¿Por qué? Porque la mayor parte de lo que crees que es tu realidad nunca fue elegido por ti. La manera en que defines el éxito, la felicidad, el dinero, las relaciones, incluso los límites de lo que crees que puedes lograr, fue programada en ti por la sociedad, tu crianza y las personas a tu alrededor. Nacimos dentro de lo que yo llamo la trampa cultural, una matriz invisible de creencias, reglas e ideas de todas las personas y culturas que nos rodean, mezcladas entre sí. Piénsalo. ¿Por qué creemos que trabajar duro equivale a tener éxito? ¿Por qué pensamos que necesitamos un título universitario para ser exitosos? ¿Por qué nos sentimos culpables por nuestras necesidades? Estas no son verdades universales. Son solo reglas que hemos aceptado sin cuestionar. Yo las llamo rules, reglas basura con las que la sociedad nos mantiene atrapados. La mayoría de las personas pasan la vida siguiendo un guión que nunca escribieron ellos mismos. Trabajan en empleos que odian porque les dijeron que era lo seguro. Sacrifican su felicidad para cumplir con las expectativas de la sociedad. Se ponen límites porque les han dicho que así es la vida. Incluso bajan sus estándares en las relaciones, tolerando a personas que les faltan el respeto.
I'm working too much to actually interact with you guys. Sorry. So, bye-bye. Have a good one.
Permanecen en esas relaciones. Y aquí viene la parte aterradora. La mayoría de las personas ni siquiera se